news bulletin just now, after all this time? The media has finally allowed the true reason as to why the protesters have marched on DC, and it is exactly what I have been saying all this time, a revolution. It is because Americans are pissed. They are sick of this country that has been overthrown by the elite, greedy, manipulators and politicians. Throughout this entire pandemic, the lies and half-truths of our leaders have taken its final toll on the American public, and they have decided that if we are going to die, then we are going to die in the country we were told about in school as we were growing up. I say we observe the reverence of the wisdom our forefathers displayed in their revolution against the mighty King George in Britain. I say to make it known to all with actions that speak louder than words. Wherever this new revolution of the Sons of Liberty makes their stand, they should take as much tea as can be gathered and dump it in the local river to make a statement that we are America, we stand for freedom against this tyranny that has become the power ruling over us, and we will not take it any longer. For life, for freedom, and for the pursuit of happiness that was the American dream. That was the lie they have used to promote foreign immigrants to come to this country, but that was once a truth of our fallen country's creed. Let us take back what is ours and make that lie a truth once more. I shall not hide any longer behind the mask of my facade. I do not fear persecution of this system, for what we stand for is our constitutional rights given to us in the Declaration of Independence. That was another atrocity I remember hearing the Senate committee denouncing our rights to, not directly of course, but in a jumbled modern use of terminology whose words represented the same meaning as to that which was written down in the Declaration of Independence, which is still viewable on social media as it was in the video segment after they reconvened. If you listen to their words and realize what they are saying is directly defying the actual written laws that govern their positions, authority that is by the people, and placing themselves in positions of authority above the people without actually using those words but instead substituted terminology to avoid responsibility, like politicians are so famous for doing, then you will see what shocked me as I say that those senators got nothing less than what they deserved, which was a little shock and awe returned to take its toll on the hand that manipulates it. Oh Trump, they really have demonized you, but you should have realized they would not see your siding with them as anything else, because you're a politician. When you chose to take office, that small little voice within you that was crying out in protest, was trying to tell you that this is what it cost. You sold out the true will of the people in order to become the elite's mascot. Only now do you realize what being president really meant, and it was to be a scapegoat, a fall guy for the elite. Because of your decision to do so, you will never be able to be seen or your actions be taken as anything else than that of a politician. There is a way out of all this, you know, a way to escape becoming a tragedy you know you feel weighing heavily upon you, a way to truly gain unquestionable approval. Martyrdom. The idle hands of the devil, they say, ha ha ha. For the devil will have his due. For hundreds of years men have thought themselves able to reach heights of unscrupulous power that would keep them safe from my inevitable approach that will take their corrupted souls to the hell they so undoubtedly deserve. Caesar tried it, Saladin tried it, King Henry VIII tried it, Napoleon tried it. What happened to them? Well, their kingdoms and empires fell down around them before their eyes, stripped of their armor that kept them safe, and they fell anyways. The lesson to learn here, I believe, is that total power, no matter how hard one tries, corrupts totally. I've narrowed down and uncovered the time frame and events of Noah's flood and Enoch's tale. They were both tales written about the events that happened about 75,000 to 80,000 years ago during the Great Cataclysm that brought the Old Kingdom to its end with a three-stage catastrophe, each one spanning over 10,000 years apart. I have archaeological and geological surveys and data that support it also. So in closing, I would like to personally extend my ass cheeks to Aaron Rapp, former president of the Atheist Committee, who said Noah's tale never happened and it was all a fictional story. To you, sir, I say, and I quote, "Kiss my ass, APEP 3 Ra 0. End quote. And sorry about Ulma running straight over your house, and I'm sorry about the new continental divide forming along a path that runs straight under your house, and I'm sorry about the new barometric pressure system that goes along with that newly forming continental shelf that has turned that region into a hurricane magnet, and I'm sorry about the negative attention all this has brought you, because it basically drew a bullseye right over you, comprised of natural disasters that all the gods of the religions you denounced and insulted can follow right to your doorstep, that has become like a spiritual waiting line for a ride at Disney World, all of them waiting to give you some well-deserved revenge, such as the swarm of locusts and grasshoppers that was so thick the weather Doppler radar thought it was a small storm system. That wasn't me, that was someone else you pissed off, and I'm sorry about the heart condition you developed not too long ago that will end up killing you one day before the cancer does, and I'm sorry about hunting down your little atheist minions like John Mater and throwing them under the bus for the same behavior patterns you inspired them to become and now suffer for it in ways normal people would never even begin to imagine possible, such as Dark Matter 2525 now makes videos that support the virtues of God's will without him knowing it, or having any problems with the way they impact his viewers now, and every time he tries to make a video like he used to, they come out like completely devoid of humor. See his Trump episode to see an example of this. And finally, I'm sorry about the life you've led that seems like God just took a big shit in your coffee cup rather than lift a quark of effort to help you with your problems in life. Oh yeah, and I'm sorry your wife looks like Yoko Ono. Now on to the chain of events that our poor student in the dunce cap proclaims never happened. First there was the eruption of Mount Toba that collapsed the Himalayan Cascade mountain range into what they call the ninth sunken continent of Zuolindia, that was caused by the empty magma chamber collapsing after the eruption. The supervolcano caused all 9 volcanoes in the Ring of Fire chain to erupt along with it for 150 days straight. That brought an ash cloud covering the earth in 5 days and killed most of the life on the surface within a week. In the end there were a total of maybe 1,000 humans left still alive in scattered regions around the world. The surface was uninhabitable for 1,000 years afterward. The survivors retreated into the subterranean cavern cities, like Petra and others, until the surface became cleared. Then you have the 3 asteroids that struck at the same time about 15,000 years after the Mount Toba eruption, which caused the flood event. One struck in India which killed Brahma and Vishnu, who warned his son Manu just before the tidal surge from the impact killed him and Brahma, that was on board a fishing ship on the other side of the coast of India, and told him to sail for Kailasa temple, and survived. His tale is at the beginning of the Mahabharata. Another struck off the coast of Africa that may have caused the complete and total destruction of the antediluvian city that once stood in the North African region that is now called the Rigshaw Plateau. Only the foundation structure of this city remains. The third one struck in the Caribbean that was the main asteroid that the other 2 had separated from. Evidence of this can be found in the island of the Monkey King that is still saturated with deep space cosmic radiation. This radiation caused the mutation of what we call the flesh-eating bacteria that mutated into staph infection, and I'm sure others as well. The third and final catastrophe of the Great Cataclysm was a partial flip of the polar caps that turned the North and South Poles into the tropical zones and the Caribbean and New Zealand region into the polar North and South Arctic zones for a while. This occurred about 40,000 years ago according to evidence found within the rings of a tree trunk from that era where the distortion of the magnetic field is evident. Archaeologically and geologically there has been no explanation for this event. However, there are ancient grimoire of arcane lore that tell of this point in time being referred to as the disappearance of the mystic ether. In this era they had built large ziggurat-style temples that harnessed the fundamental forces of the universe and brought them to a fulcrum point through the design of these temples. Though there is not details as to the exact purpose or function of these temples, only that the elemental forces were directed into a focal point and that one day the elemental energy that flowed through them began to slowly dry up into a slight trickle and then completely stopped. Now they believed that the elemental energy that flowed through these temples, whose source was drawn from the Schumann resonance, or the mana pools, and flowed through and was a part of all life forms on this planet. It was necessary for life to be possible on this world, for it was the spark that fueled the very energy of life itself, which is why it was later depicted as manna bread, for it was required to sustain life in general for all forms of life. Well, one day the energy flow stopped, and magic that was drawn from this as well ended, and has barely been possible since. The loss of magical energy caused the last conflict of the old world to erupt into what was called the Necromancer Wars. The highly adept magic users began fighting among each other at first out of desperation, and the rest of the world became the substitutes used to replace the energy needed for magic. This became the origin of sacrificial magic, where the sorcerers began using any and all forms that had the energy of life flowing through them that they would use to replace the energy necessary for spells to be cast. This barbaric vicious war went on for 9,000 years, consuming any and all walks of life, until the Old Kingdom finally died with no traces of survivors except patches of small villages scattered here and there. Also note that this is the era in which the one we call God tries to forget and does not like the subject brought up has to do with this era. For in this era God, the Creator, had a more tangible form. An ethereal type form as I understand it, and it was at this time that the battle for mankind's soul began between heaven and hell. Mankind emerged 9,500 years ago from the forests of Mesopotamia. Before that they came from the Garden of Eden that replenished mankind and life on this world about 13,900 years ago. From 14,500 to 13,900 years ago there was no life upon Earth, and desert covered the entire surface except for 3 senile patches of green forest. One of those was in Mesopotamia. The garden was actually off the coast of Persia, but the entire stretch between Persia and current Caesarea was lush with green forest at that time. They did not see the sky as the edge of the world. To them it was one side of the forests until the desert edge began to the other similar type side. Where life ended and sand began was the edge of the world. Archaeologists would do well to remember that when examining antediluvian artifacts. The last records of that kingdom state that though magic was gone from the world, the younger Dryas people's mystical cities still stood vibrant with magical energy, but no one knew the details of how it worked or why their magic seemed to be drawn from another source different from the mana pools. But the Dryas people disappeared long ago, just before Mount Taba erupted, and no one knew where they had gone to. The loss of the mystical energy had a chain reaction effect that led to the Schumann resonance oscillating and then disappearing completely for a time, and Earth became much like Mars is now, thin atmosphere and no electromagnetic shield, which partially caused the magnetized polar caps to flip, but only halfway. That still caused catastrophic natural disasters to sweep over every corner of the Earth. Now supposedly, somewhere between that last cataclysm until sometime before 13,700 years ago is when the Garden of Eden was made and cured. In fact, it was the purpose of the animals that Noah's Ark was said to house, for everything that was on that ship was used to repopulate all the life forms on the Earth. But I don't think Noah's Ark that they speak of in the Hebrew legends was an actual wooden sailing ship. I think the object Hitler's OSS department was searching the occult and religious artifacts for was this ship that was portrayed in his tale Noah passed on to Shem, who first scripted the Hebrew transcription of this tale. An object that has been rumored among the Jewish texts as the 4 godheads and the Merkaba pinwheel of holy flames. This was said to be a vision of the essence of God that could be understood by mankind's limited understanding at that time. This object's algorithmic signature has been detected traveling through a thin layer that separates existence from the field it travels within. That field is time itself. Stellar anomalous energy signatures have been observed by astronomers and astrophysicists for many decades now, but they have not been able to accept what they are seeing. In their astrological filaments of particles they have detected an object that appears and then disappears within the particle's energy fields or photons. Its logistical patterns are how they trace it and keep track of it. Going through the patterns of stellar movement in the past, they have found this same signature going back to about 30,000 years after the expansion moment before it disappeared from observable positions, possibly continuing to before the moment when time began, when the universe was in its initial phase of vibration before the Big Bang and before time and solid matter existed. This anomaly is the best possible evidence of anything that could possibly be the presence of the Creator heading towards the beginning of existence. Scientifically speaking, it is quite possible that a computer-based device could be equipped with the equipment that could use the Schumann resonance field-based process of energy frequency transition combined with a binaural sound wave pattern that would oscillate in synchronicity with the Schumann transition process, and that could create a kinetically based charge of energy that would have the ability to speak the key particle needed to fuse and bond particle matter into being. Combined, it would sound like a hum that gets louder and more profound as it is said. That sound would be on fusing binaural sound waves. Kinetic energy transitional process is set to take that sound and manipulate it into vibrating at that frequency, and the result would be a raw positively charged graviton particle. My theory though is that this object is not in itself God but is another eon-type vessel, like the prophets, but this eon would be compared to that of the measurer of heavens. He most likely housed himself within its technology and used it to design the details and set the boundaries of existence with it. This theoretical but statistically evident vessel of creation is what Hitler was after, that is what he was seeking to gain access to. And near the end of the war in 1945, I think he may have succeeded and faked his death within the fallout bunker and escaped with the Vril ship seen by Krishna about 65,000 years ago that crashed in the eastern horizon near South Africa's coastline. But back to the story. Where were we? The last cataclysm. It was at this time the Mayan ancestors crossed into Antarctica for a time until the poles shifted back into place. Then they migrated into South America. The strange part in all this is that the people the Mayans came from, as well as the Native Americans, Aztec, Thule, Indus, they all knew of all these disasters before they occurred. That is why they began their migrational journey, was to survive all that. According to the Aztecs, their original tribe they all came from was from the civilization who lived in Aztlan, which would make them the Aztlantines. The Mayan calendar that ended in 2012 wasn't the end of the world, it was the end of that migrational clock, which meant the cycle of disasters would begin, and it marked the time when they needed to begin migrating again. That was obviously right. Look at the natural disasters around us since then. The Central Unified Kingdom at the time before the catastrophe began, where all issues and problems were brought to be resolved. All wisdom was drawn up and molded into a compendium of perfect understanding that would be shared with all who sought wisdom, where angels and man lived and oversaw the affairs of the world together as equals, neither one or the other above or below each other, when man was allowed to wield the divine spark of God's power and know the divine wisdom of heaven as this was, in the hands of mortals, the legend's source that was actual magic. This citadel of all life in the world then is the same place where the final conflict will be decided in one last meeting between God and the Lucifer, in the city of Megiddo.